Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. This is أبوشمالة speaking for Summary Translation course. And this is the first lesson for our course. Here are the main topics that we are going to discuss. We're going to talk about the definition of translation, translation equivalence, and we're going to have a quick background or a short idea about each type of different texts that we're going to deal with in this course, such as the scientific translation, media translation, literary texts, economy text, administrative text, and legal text. If we start by the question, what is translation? Actually, there are different definitions of the term translation by different theorists and translators. Here are a general definition, which is a project for transferring meaning from one language to another. And we can call this definition interlingual communication, since we are dealing with two different languages, the source language and the target language. Or it's a project for transferring message from one language into another. And focus here that in the second definition we can say that it's not just transferring, let's say, the words. No, it focuses on the message which should be transferred. We have another type of translation, which is intralingual translation. It's an exercise or exercises we engage ourselves in within the same language, such as paraphrase, explanation, interpretation. An example here is when we translate عاد خال الوفاة within the same language from Arabic into Arabic, saying عاد بخفي حنين. Let's go to the word meaning. Actually, any meaning has two types. They are denotative and connotative meaning, or we can say direct and indirect meaning. The direct is denotative and the indirect is connotative. Translators have to be fully aware of these two types of meaning. Let's take an example here. We have the verb die, pass away. Die is then or has a denotative meaning with, let's say, neutral denotative meaning. However, when I say passed away, this is connected with connotative positive connotations, which mean that you have like a good relationship with the one who passed away. Or when I say friend, like the direct meaning of friend is like صديق. However, when I say comrade, this word like has a connotation with, as it means communist. It has a political connotations, or we can say like a communist. Here are some examples like how to be careful about not just the direct meaning, but about the connotation or connotative meaning. For example, business is business, شغل شغل، لا يوجد فيه عواطف. Enough is enough، كفى or بلغ السيل الزبا. War is war، الحرب حرب فيها مآسي وآلام. Okay, now let's go to another type of, or let's discuss together equivalence. In this slide, there are three different types of equivalence. First, if we say what is the definition of equivalence? Equivalence in Arabic means تكافؤ. Any translator tries to achieve equivalence between the source language and the target language. However, there are different types of equivalence. Here we're going to discuss 3 types, and they are formal equivalence that seeks to capture the form of the source language expression. We have functional equivalence from the word function that seeks to capture the functions of the source language expression independently of the image utilized by translating it into a target language expression that performs the same function. The last one is ideational equivalence, aims to convey the communicative sense of the source language expression independently of the function and the form. The difference between functional and ideational is that functional, just like it captures the function regardless the form. However, in ideational, there is like manipulation, or there is a change in the function and also the form. Let's see this example so we can understand the 3 different types more clearly. We have here the source sentence, which is the treaty has remained dead letter since then. Let's see how the equivalence could change the translation of this sentence. When I say, or when I use formal equivalence, the translation will be بقيت المعاهدة حرفا ميتا منذ ذلك الوقت. We say that it seeks to capture the form of the source language. It's close to, let's say, literal translation. Dead letter حرفا ميتا, and this translation couldn't make sense for the target leader. What does حرفا ميتا means in Arabic? Like, the target leader may not understand what is intended. The second type, or the second example using functional equivalence, وقد بقيت المعاهدة حبرا على ورق منذ ذلك الوقت. Now the function remains the same. The functions remains the same, and this translation could be comprehensible for the target reader. He may understand or she may understand what is meant by the letter. The last type, or the last example here, ولم يتم تطبيق المعاهدة منذ ذلك الوقت, or وقد بقيت المعاهدة غير مفعلة في ذلك الوقت. If you notice here, the form here in functional equivalence remains the same, but we only change the function of this concept. However, in ideational equivalence, the form and the function, let's go back, we change the function and the form as said here. Okay, now let's go to this very important slide that talks about context, or the contextual factors. Now, any translator, when he deals with some texts, he may think about 3 things, which are the author, audience, or we can say the target reader, and the text itself. Some focuses on texts, other focuses on authors or the audience. But do you think, what are the criteria for choosing what, or choosing the focus point? Well, let's see some examples to know how can we decide which we should focus on. For example, let me start with focusing about the audience or the target reader, الجمهور المترجم إليه. Now, this example, when we translate the Arabic expression الكيان الصهيوني. This may cause like serious problems related to the different connotations associated with Zionism in the Arab world and in the Western world. Whereas Zionism is condemned by the Arabs as racist, expansionist movement. Yani in the Arab world, it's connected with negative things. It's generally regarded by the Westerners as a national liberation movement. بالغرب بيعترفوا فيها إنها إشي يعني like it's something good. So translating الكيان الصهيوني as Zionism may lead to some problems regarding the Western, for example, community or the audience. And this is why some translators suggest that the best, let's say, the best translation for الكيان الصهيوني is simply Israel, instead to translating it as Zionism, like to paying attention the target audience. Another example is Assalamu alaikum. When I say to a non-Muslim, let's say English person, when I say to him Assalamu alaikum, he may not like understand what is meant. So here I focus about like his understanding, so I may like use functional equivalence and translating it as hello. Here in these two examples, the focus is on the audience or the target reader. And by the way, there could be some manipulation of the text here. Okay, now let's go to another factor, which is the author himself. Let's see this example here from literary translation for Nizar Qabbani. Nizar Qabbani said in Arabic, يا بيروت يا أنثاي ما بين ملايين النساء. Now let's focus about the word أنثاي. أنثاي, when it's said in Arabic, it has what? It has positive connotation. It has positive connotation, and like it may show the delicacy of the poet. But when it's translated as, let's see the first translation, O period, my female from among millions of women. Here the emotions are detached from this translation, because when you say in let's say in the English community female, it may not be connected or associated with positive connotation as it the same in Arabic. So here the formal equivalence would fail. قباني ما راح يوصل نفس الفكرة اللي قباني بيحاول يوصلها. So here functional equivalence could be the best choice, translating it as O period my beloved or my lady, instead of saying female, my lady from among millions of women. So here we cared about the feelings of the author to be transferred as they are. And if you see here, like we do some manipulation in the text. عملنا بعض التغيير بالتكست مقابل إنه نحافظ على الأوثر شو هو حابب كان يوصل الرسالة. طيب the last factor آخر factor عندي التكست النص. Usually when the focus or we focus in text when we deal with like authoritative text such as legal or maybe economic text, in which every single item is very important and you cannot manipulate or change any item, because any changes may lead to some transgress or deviation from the source text. Okay, now I'm going to discuss with you the genres that we are going to have in this course. I'm going to give a short introduction about the features of each genre. The first one, as like we had its example here, the literary translation. Usually, literary translation purpose is to please the target reader. Please the target reader, and this is why we usually do some manipulation, some, let's say, maybe some functional equivalence to achieve this purpose. We have economic texts. An economic text or economic discourse is a global discourse. This globalization has led to the emergence of many loan words, and translators have to be aware of these loan words. Translating economic texts is demanding since translators must stick to the information in the source language. So here, if I ask you what is the focus, sure, the focus will be for the text itself, not the audience, not the author. The other type is scientific translation or scientific texts. Scientific texts are considered the most challenging for the translator. The term science covers a wide range of disciplines that could include but are not limited to physics, biology, chemistry, astronomy, mathematics, geology, biochemistry, etc. And why it's very challenging? You know why? Because any deviation, أي انحراف on the part of the reader or translator will be judged as transgression. Transgression. Okay. Media translation. The main means for receiving information and entertainment, and this is why it's like the literary translation. It focuses on the target reader to entertain him and provide him with the information. The main function is to express the message in an effective way. It's characterized by being more free than standard language. The last thing is the nature of news production necessitates a simple style with very short sentences and subtle cohesive devices that are almost absent. You will notice this especially in the headlines of news. We are going to discuss them in details in every chapter. Administrative texts or translation. Administrative texts are associated with governing bodies of an entity, from large countries to small companies. They include documents associated with the legal issues of such bodies, for example, the regulations of a company or responsibilities of a job, like job descriptions. Here you may find some overlapping بعض التشابه between the administrative texts and legal texts. Legal and administrative language features are very similar. In addition, they differ from language to language. So the translator is advised. Here I'm talking in this point about the administrative itself. Administrative texts differ from one language to another, so the translator is advised to be acquainted with the terminology of the text of both the source and target language. Undoubtedly, these texts are very formal, without much use of literary features. The last genre that we're going to discuss in our talk or in our course is legal text. And I can say that this is the harder or the most challenging, let's say, genre in translating. Legal texts are classified as follow. First, we have number one, legislative text. النصوص التشريعية. For example, like domestic statutes, subordinate laws, etc. We have judicial text. النصوص القضائية. النصوص القضائية that produced in the judicial process by judicial officers and other legal authorities. We have legal scholarly text produced by academic, lawyers or legal scholars يعني بالبحث العلمي أغراض البحث العلمي. Private legal texts that include texts written by lawyers اللي بيكتبوها المحامين like contracts, leases, wills, etc. Translating legal text is not easy. It's complex, as I have just said. Why? It's bound by culture and language, which means a translation from one legal system into another, from the source legal system into the target legal system, which means that you have to be fully aware of the culture and the system of, let's say, legislation and judicial system in the target language and the source language, because it may differ between them. Okay, so most of legal terms should be translated as exactly as possible. So this is the end of our presentation. Thank you for watching and see you in other videos.